Marcus leaned in close, his whisper cutting through the champagne-soaked laughter around us. "Did your boss just introduce you as the bookkeeper? You literally designed the entire accounting system for this company." I waved him off. I was used to Diane minimizing my contributions, but Marcus looked genuinely disturbed. "Something is very, very wrong here," he said quietly. I laughed nervously, sipping my drink, but over the next hour at this glittering party on Diane's new yacht, I started noticing things. The way Diane accepted congratulations for her innovative financial restructuring, the way she told stories about late nights solving problems I actually solved. The sick feeling growing in my stomach. 5 days later, I'd be sitting across from federal auditors and Diane's whole empire would come crashing down. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. 3 years ago, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I had an MBA in forensic accounting from a decent school, 5 years of experience at a mid-sized firm, and I was hungry for more. When Diane Sterling offered me the senior financial analyst position at Sterling Financial Consulting, she painted this beautiful picture of mentorship and growth. "I see so much potential in you," she'd said over coffee, her smile warm and genuine. "I built this company from nothing, and I want to bring someone up with me. In 2 years, we'll be talking about partnership." I was so flattered. Here was this successful woman who'd built a thriving consultancy, and she wanted to invest in me. The salary was good, the clients were impressive, and Diane seemed like the kind of boss who'd actually advocate for me. I signed on immediately. The first few months were great. Diane introduced me to clients as her brilliant senior financial analyst and gave me challenging projects. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first. At a client dinner maybe 6 months in, she introduced me as my financial analyst, not senior. I figured she'd just forgotten. Then it was my analyst. Then, at a networking event, "This is Sarah, she helps me with the numbers." Helps you with the numbers. I have a master's degree in forensic accounting. I'd started noticing she'd present my work in meetings without mentioning my name at all. "I've developed a new reconciliation methodology," she'd say, discussing the system I'd spent 3 weeks creating. When I gently brought it up once, she laughed and said, "Oh, sweetie, that's just how business works. The clients want to hear from the principal. You'll understand when you're more senior." More senior. I was already senior. It said so on my business cards. At least it did until Diane had new ones printed and mine just said financial analyst. When I asked about it, she said there was a printing error and she'd fix it. She never did. Let me be clear about what my job actually entailed. I wasn't filing receipts and balancing checkbooks. I was designing proprietary accounting systems for mid to large cap companies. I managed a portfolio of 12 major clients, each worth 6 figures annually to Sterling. I created the risk assessment methodology that became our signature service, the thing that made us stand out from every other financial consulting firm in the region. When a manufacturing client came to us with a nightmare of shadow inventory and revenue leakage, I built a custom tracking system that saved them $1.2 million in the first year. When a tech startup needed their books ready for Series B funding, I restructured their entire financial architecture in 6 weeks. I worked 70-hour weeks regularly. I'd be at my desk until midnight, surviving on cold coffee and determination, building models and systems that were genuinely innovative. And then I'd watch Diane present my work to clients like she'd done it herself. She'd stand at the head of the conference table in her designer suit, clicking through my slides, explaining my methodology in slightly simplified terms, accepting their praise with gracious nods. "It's what I love about this work," she'd say, "solving these complex puzzles." I'd sit there taking notes like a good little assistant. Sometimes a client would ask me a technical question and Diane would let me answer. Then she'd jump in to clarify what I'd just said perfectly clearly. I told myself this was normal. This was paying dues. Every successful person had to do this at the beginning, right? Diane kept saying partnership was coming. "You're doing amazing work," she'd tell me in our one-on-ones. "I'm building a case for bringing you on as a junior partner. These things take time." So I kept my head down and kept working. I told myself the recognition would come. Marcus thought I was insane. "She's using you," he'd say after I'd cancel another date night for a client emergency. "You're doing partner-level work for analyst-level credit." But I'd defend Diane. She was my mentor. She was teaching me. This was just how the business world worked. I think part of me knew, even then, that I was lying to myself, but admitting it felt too scary, too destabilizing. So I stayed in my lane and kept being the brilliant, invisible engine behind Diane Sterling's success. Marcus was the best thing in my life, which made it harder when he kept pointing out things I didn't want to see. We'd met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding, and he proposed last spring in the most Marcus way possible. Straightforward, sincere, no flash. He's a software engineer, the kind of person who sees systems and patterns everywhere, who troubleshoots problems methodically, which meant he'd been troubleshooting my relationship with Diane Sterling for the past 2 years. "You worked until 2 a.m. last night," he'd say, watching me drag myself to the coffee maker. Meanwhile, Diane posted Instagram stories from Santorini yesterday. "How does that make sense?" I'd make excuses. She'd earned the right to delegate. She was bringing in the clients while I did the execution. That's how businesses worked. Marcus would just look at me with this concerned expression that made me feel like I was defending something indefensible. He started keeping track, which annoyed me at the time but turned out to be important later. He'd screenshot Diane's social media posts. Her at a spa in Sedona, her at a Michelin star restaurant in New York, her shopping in Paris, and he'd compare them to my calendar. "She was supposedly in that meeting with you on Tuesday," he'd say. "But she was actually in the Hamptons. You ran that meeting alone, didn't you?" He wasn't wrong. The financial situation bothered him too. I made $95,000 a year, which sounds good until you consider what I was actually doing. Marcus ran the numbers once. He's good at that, and showed me that partners at similar firms were making $250,000 to $400,000 annually. "You're billing clients at partner rates," he said. "I've seen the invoices on your desk. Sterling charges $450 an hour for your time. Where's that money going?" I knew where it was going. Diane paid herself a substantial salary, covered her luxury lifestyle, and apparently was now buying yachts. But I kept thinking the partnership was coming, that I'd get my share eventually. Marcus called it what it was. "You're being exploited, Sarah. She's built her entire business on your back, and she's never going to give you credit because then she'd have to share the money." I hated when he said things like that, mostly because I was starting to suspect he was right. The invitation came via email with a champagne glass emoji in the subject line. "Team celebration aboard the Sterling," Diane wrote. "Let's toast to another record-breaking year. Saturday at 6 p.m., Marina del Rey. Business casual. But bring your party shoes." She made it sound like a company-wide thing, except Sterling Financial Consulting's team was essentially me, Diane, and 2 part-time administrative assistants who mostly worked remotely. Still, I felt obligated to go. You don't skip your boss's party, especially when she's dangling partnership discussions that were supposedly happening any day now. I mentioned it to Marcus that evening, already framing it as a quick appearance, maybe an hour tops. He set down his laptop and looked at me. "I'm coming with you." It wasn't a question. "You don't have to," I said. "It'll probably be boring." "I'm coming," he repeated. "I want to see this yacht." That's when I actually looked up the Sterling. It was a 65-foot azimuth, purchased 3 months earlier for $2.3 million. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Sterling Financial was successful, sure. We had good clients and steady revenue, but $2.3 million successful? I'd never seen our overall financials. Diane kept that information close, but the math felt wrong. When we arrived at the marina that Saturday, the wrongness intensified. The yacht was stunning, all sleek white lines and polished chrome. There were probably 40 people aboard, none of whom I recognized, except for a few clients. Catered food, premium liquor, an actual bartender mixing craft cocktails. String lights everywhere. It looked like something from a magazine, spread about how the wealthy live. Marcus and I stood on the dock for a moment before boarding. "Sarah," he said quietly, "how much does Sterling Financial make in a year?" I didn't know. I'd never seen those numbers. But standing there looking at this floating palace, I was starting to realize that maybe I should have asked that question a long time ago. The party was in full swing when I started really listening. We'd been on the yacht maybe 20 minutes, Marcus staying close to my side, when I overheard Robert Chen from Meridian Tech talking to another guest. "Diane's genius is in seeing patterns nobody else catches," he was saying, gesturing with his wine glass. "She completely redesigned our revenue recognition system, saved us from a potential SEC nightmare." That was my system. I'd spent 6 weeks on that project, including one memorable all-nighter where I'd practically rebuilt their entire accounting infrastructure. I opened my mouth to say something, but then Diane was there, laughing graciously. "I do love a good challenge," she said, touching Robert's arm. "Your books were quite the puzzle." My books were quite the puzzle. I felt Marcus tense beside me. We moved through the crowd, and everywhere I turned, it was the same. A woman from a pharmaceutical client praising Diane's innovative variance analysis methodology, which I'd created from scratch. A CFO thanking Diane for personally handling an audit prep that I'd done entirely alone while Diane was in Cabo. Then came the moment that Marcus would later say made him certain something was criminal. Diane was introducing us to a potential new client, a silver-haired man named Gregory, something who owned a chain of medical supply companies. "This is Sarah," Diane said, her hand on my shoulder in a way that felt possessive. "She's our bookkeeper, keeps everything running smoothly behind the scenes." Bookkeeper. Marcus's whisper came immediately close to my ear. "Did your boss just introduce you as the bookkeeper? You literally designed the entire accounting system for this company." I tried to brush it off, but Marcus looked genuinely disturbed. "Something is very, very wrong here," he said quietly. And suddenly, I was seeing everything through different eyes. The yacht that cost more than I'd make in 25 years. The way Diane accepted praise for work I'd done. The way she positioned me as support staff while she played the visionary. It was like a spell breaking, or maybe like finally admitting I'd been under one all along. I was standing near the stern, trying to calm my racing thoughts, when Diane swept past us to greet some new arrivals. She left her phone on a deck chair, face up, and the screen lit up with an incoming text. I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't that person. But the message was right there, impossible not to see. "The auditors are asking about revenue discrepancies from 2023. Stay calm, they don't know anything yet." The sender was listed as Richard with a heart emoji. My forensic accounting brain, the one I'd trained for years, the one that could spot irregularities in spreadsheets like other people spot typos, kicked into overdrive immediately. Revenue discrepancies. 2022-2023. Those were the years I'd restructured everything. Those were the years I'd built most of Sterling's current systems, migrated client accounts to new software, redesigned our entire billing and revenue recognition methodology. I knew those years inside and out. What discrepancies? I managed the client accounts. I processed the invoices. I knew what revenue should look like because I'd personally handled most of it. If there were discrepancies, they weren't coming from the client-facing work, which meant they were coming from somewhere else, somewhere I didn't have visibility. Marcus noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer. My mind was spinning through possibilities. Revenue discrepancies in a financial consulting firm could mean a lot of things. Overbilling clients, underbilling and pocketing the difference, shell companies, money laundering, revenue recognition fraud, any of which would be catastrophic, and most of which would be federal crimes. And auditors were asking about it. Which auditors? IRS, SEC, an independent firm doing due diligence for something? The fact that this Richard person, whoever he was, felt the need to send a "stay calm, they don't know anything yet," message meant there was definitely something to know, something worth hiding. Diane returned and picked up her phone, smiling at someone's joke, completely unaware that I'd seen the message. I felt like I was going to be sick. Those were my systems, my work. If something illegal was happening with Sterling's finances during 2022, 2023, and I'd built the infrastructure during that time, my fingerprints were all over it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while my brain ran through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Around 2 a.m., Marcus gave up pretending to sleep and turned on the bedside lamp. "Okay," he said. "Talk to me. What did you see on that phone?" I told him about the text message. He sat up straight. "Auditors, revenue discrepancies. Sarah, that's not ambiguous language. That's someone discussing active fraud." He got out of bed and grabbed his laptop. "Let's think about this logically. That yacht costs more than your entire salary for 5 years. Actually, let me look up the exact model." He typed for a minute. "Okay, a 65-foot azimuth ranges from $2.1 to $2.5 million. You make $95,000 a year. That yacht costs approximately 24 years of your salary. How is that possible?" I'd been asking myself the same question. We started going through everything I could remember about Sterling's finances, which was when I realized something terrible. I'd never actually seen the company's overall books. I managed individual client accounts. I knew exactly what Meridian Tech paid us, what their billing looked like, their revenue recognition, their contract terms, same with every other client in my portfolio. But I'd never seen Sterling Financial Consulting's consolidated financials. I'd never seen a balance sheet for the company itself. I'd never seen our total revenue, our expenses, our cash flow. Diane had always kept that information to herself. "That's not normal," Marcus said flatly. "You're supposedly being groomed for partnership. You should have access to the company financials. Every potential partner needs to see what they're buying into." He was right. I'd never questioned it because Diane always framed it as protecting proprietary information, waiting until the partnership was official. But now it felt like exactly what it was, keeping me in the dark. "What if," Marcus said slowly, "the money coming in from clients isn't the same as the money being reported to whoever, the IRS, investors, if there are any? What if she's routing it through other entities?" My stomach dropped, because that made perfect sense. And if she was doing that, she'd need someone technical to build the systems that made it possible, someone who understood accounting software and financial architecture, someone like me. I'd built the infrastructure that could be facilitating fraud, and I hadn't even known it. Monday morning, I walked into the office with my heart pounding so hard I thought Diane would hear it. She was in a great mood, humming as she made coffee, talking about how successful the yacht party had been. "Several promising leads from Saturday," she said brightly. "You made a good impression, Sarah," as the bookkeeper, apparently. I smiled and nodded and went to my desk, and then I started digging. I had access to most of our systems. I'd built half of them after all, but I'd always stayed in my lane, focused on my assigned clients, never looking at the bigger picture because that wasn't my job. Except now I was looking. And my forensic accounting training, the skills I'd sharpened over years of finding irregularities and tracing money flows, kicked in completely. I started with something simple, total revenue. I pulled up every client account I managed, all 12 of them. I knew their contracts, their billing rates, their payment schedules. I calculated what Sterling should have received from my portfolio over the past year, approximately $1.8 million. Then I looked at what was actually recorded in our main accounting system for those same clients, $1.3 million. $500,000 was missing, or not missing exactly. It was somewhere, just not where it should be. I dug deeper, following payment trails. Money from clients hit our primary business account, but then it moved. Transfers to something called Sterling Management LLC, payments to Sterling Holdings, consulting fees paid to RS Financial Services. I'd never heard of any of these entities. I checked our registered business documents. None of them were listed as subsidiaries or affiliates. They were separate entities entirely. And money was flowing to them in ways that made no sense from a legitimate business perspective. A $50,000 payment from Meridian Tech would come in, but only $35,000 would be recorded as sterling financial revenue. The rest would get transferred out within days, labeled as management fees or consulting services or administrative overhead. I was looking at a shell company structure, money laundering or embezzlement or both, and the transfers had my authorization codes on them. My credentials, my digital signature approving transactions I'd never actually approved. By Tuesday afternoon, I had mapped out the entire scheme. And it was worse than I'd thought. Sterling Financial Consulting was the legitimate front. Then there was Sterling Management LLC, Sterling Holdings, RS Financial Services, and two more entities I found buried in transfer records, Apex Advisory Group and Clearwater Consulting Partners. 5 shell companies, all interconnected, all receiving money that originated from our clients. Here's how it worked. A client would pay Sterling Financial for my services. Let's say $100,000. That payment would hit our primary account, and I'd record it properly in the client management system I'd built. But then Diane, or someone with administrative access, would transfer $30,000 to Sterling Management as a management fee. Another $15,000 would go to RS Financial for specialized consulting. Maybe $10,000 to Apex Advisory for research services. The client thought they were paying Sterling Financial Consulting $100,000 for my work. Sterling Financial would only report $45,000 as revenue. The other $55,000 would disappear into these shell entities, and I'd bet anything those companies weren't reporting that income properly, if at all. I pulled up payment records I'd personally processed. There was an invoice I'd sent to Meridian Tech for $85,000. I remembered it clearly, a complex system, integration project I'd worked on for 3 months. In the client file, it showed $85,000 received and paid. But in the general ledger, only $52,000 was recorded as sterling revenue. The remaining $33,000 had been siphoned off to shell companies within 72 hours of receipt. My authorization codes were on the original transaction. If this ever came to light, it would look like I'd processed the payment knowing where it was going. Except I hadn't known. I'd never seen these transfers. I'd never approved them. But my credentials had been used, which meant either Diane had access to my login information or the system had been set up to auto-approve certain transfers under my name. I was looking at systematic embezzlement and tax fraud, and I'd been set up as the technical architect who'd made it all possible. I was terrified, but I was also furious. My work, my innovative systems, my late nights, my actual expertise was being used to steal from clients and defraud the government, and I was being positioned as the fall guy while Diane bought yachts and played the successful entrepreneur. I left work early on Tuesday, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely fake, and told Marcus everything the moment I got home. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker by the minute. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We need to protect you. Right now. Tonight." He was already pulling out his laptop and a notebook. "You're going to document everything from here, not from your work computer. Screenshot everything you can access remotely. Forward any relevant emails to your personal account. Use BCC so there's no trail. Create a timeline of when you built each system, what access you actually had, what you knew versus what was hidden from you." We worked until 3 a.m. I logged into our systems from home and started taking screenshots of the shell company transfers, the revenue discrepancies, the payment routing. I forwarded emails where Diane had given me specific instructions, proof that I was following her directions, not acting independently. Marcus created a spreadsheet tracking every suspicious transaction I could find, cross-referencing it with dates Diane was out of the office or on vacation. Around midnight, Marcus asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. "Do you think Diane has been setting you up to take the fall? You do all the actual work. Your name is on everything." I stopped typing. The cursor blinked on my screen while I processed what he'd just articulated. Think about it, Marcus continued. She keeps you isolated from the big picture. She minimizes your title so clients think you're just support staff. She uses your credentials for transactions. She takes credit for your innovations publicly, which means if this blows up, she can claim she barely understood the technical details, that you were the financial expert who built everything. You're the one with the MBA in forensic accounting. You're the one with access to all the systems. If federal investigators come knocking, who's the obvious suspect? Me. I was the obvious suspect. Diane had spent 3 years positioning herself as the charismatic front person who was merely good at relationships, while I was the technical genius behind the scenes, which meant if this scheme collapsed, she could claim ignorance and point directly at me, the brilliant forensic accountant who'd built an elaborate fraud scheme. I felt like I might throw up. That thought crystallized everything, and suddenly I saw the past 3 years with perfect, horrible clarity. Of course, that's what was happening. Diane had been setting me up from day one. She'd hired someone with a forensic accounting degree, someone with the exact credentials that would make them seem capable of designing sophisticated fraud. She'd given me access to everything, made sure my name was attached to every system, every innovation, every technical decision. Then she'd systematically diminished my title and visibility so that publicly I was just support staff, just the bookkeeper, someone who'd be bitter about being overlooked, someone who might have motive to embezzle. I was the perfect scapegoat. If auditors or federal investigators came looking, Diane could play the victim. I trusted her completely, I could hear her saying, tears in her eyes. She had access to everything. I didn't understand the technical details. I focused on client relationships while she managed the complex accounting work. I had no idea what she was doing behind the scenes. She'd even built in the resentment angle. Everyone at that yacht party had seen her take credit for my work, had heard her introduce me as the bookkeeper. When investigators interviewed those people, they'd confirm that yes, Sarah seemed underappreciated and overlooked. Perfect motive for embezzlement. Meanwhile, Diane stayed pristine, the charismatic business owner who was too busy networking and bringing in clients to notice her trusted employee was stealing. She probably had documentation showing how much she delegated to me, how much she relied on my expertise, evidence that would make it look like I had free rein to do whatever I wanted with the company finances. I ran to the bathroom and actually threw up. Marcus came in, held my hair back, got me water. When I could speak again, I said, "I'll go to prison. Diane will testify that she didn't understand what I was building, and I'll go to federal prison for fraud I didn't commit." But underneath the terror was something else. Rage. Pure, white-hot fury. Diane had used me. She'd exploited my work, stolen my innovations, taken credit for my expertise, all while building a criminal enterprise, using my systems and my credentials. She'd minimized and manipulated me for 3 years, keeping me compliant and grateful while she set me up for destruction. I wasn't anyone's scapegoat. Not anymore. I made the decision Wednesday morning. If this was going to blow up and that text message about auditors meant it was already in motion, I was going to the authorities first. Marcus spent the entire day helping me organize everything into a coherent narrative. We had screenshots of the shell company transfers, payment records showing discrepancies, emails proving I'd been kept siloed, my employment contract showing I was never given access to overall company financials, even Diane's social media posts showing a lifestyle that didn't match Sterling's reported revenue. Marcus helped me write a timeline that was clear and factual. When I was hired, what systems I'd built, what I actually had access to versus what I didn't, when I first discovered the discrepancies, how my credentials had been used without my knowledge. By Thursday afternoon, I had a 20-page whistleblower complaint with 40 pages of supporting documentation. I submitted it to both the SEC and IRS through their official whistleblower portals. I included everything: the shell companies, the revenue routing, the fact that clients were being billed one amount while Sterling reported another, The $2.3 million yacht that made no mathematical sense based on the company's legitimate reported income. My own role, I was completely transparent about having built the accounting systems, but I documented extensively that I'd been compartmentalized, that I'd never seen the full financial picture, that I'd discovered the fraud only days ago. I included the text message I'd seen on Diane's phone, explaining the context. I even included evidence of how Diane had systematically minimized my title and taken credit for my work publicly, establishing the pattern of her controlling the narrative while I did technical work in isolation. The hardest part was the section where I had to acknowledge that my credentials were on fraudulent transactions. But I documented every security flaw in our systems, showed that admin-level users could process transfers under other people's authorization codes, provided evidence that I'd never received notifications for the shell company transfers. I made it clear. I was a witness coming forward, not a perpetrator trying to minimize guilt. Marcus read the final version 3 times. "This is good," he said. "You're protecting yourself. You're doing the right thing." I hit submit before I could second-guess myself. There was no going back now. The SEC contacted me Friday morning. A phone call was scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m., which meant I had to go into the office and act completely normal for 3 more days while knowing that everything was about to explode. It was psychological torture. I sat at my desk, running routine reports, while my heart hammered against my ribs. Every time Diane walked past, I was certain she could see the truth written across my face. But she didn't notice anything. She was her usual self, cheerful, patronizing, completely oblivious that I just submitted a federal whistleblower complaint that would destroy her life. On Monday morning, she brought in fancy coffee for both of us. "I appreciate how hard you've been working," she said, setting a latte on my desk. "You're so good at the detail work, Sarah. I honestly don't know what I'd do without you." She patted my shoulder, her hand lingering in that possessive way that used to make me feel valued and now made my skin crawl. "You're so good at the detail work," like I was some kind of diligent assistant rather than the person who'd built her entire business infrastructure. I smiled tightly. "Just doing my job." "And you do it so well," she said warmly. "I've been thinking we should really sit down soon and talk about your future here. I know I keep saying partnership discussions are coming, but I mean it this time. Maybe next quarter?" Next quarter. The same promise she'd been dangling for 3 years, except next quarter Diane would likely be under federal investigation, and there wouldn't be a Sterling Financial Consulting anymore. I nodded and thanked her, and watched her walk back to her office, completely unaware that my phone call with a federal agent was scheduled for 10 a.m., 1 hour away. I spent that hour pretending to work on a client report while actually reviewing my whistleblower complaint one more time, making sure I hadn't missed anything. At 9:55, I told Diane I needed to step out for a personal call. She waved me off cheerfully. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. This was it. The phone call lasted 45 minutes, and by the end of it, they wanted to meet in person. 2 days later, Marcus and I sat in a conference room at a federal building downtown, facing 2 investigators, Agent Patricia Moore from the SEC and Agent David Chen from IRS Criminal Investigation. I'd brought printed copies of everything, organized in labeled folders like I was presenting a thesis defense. Agent Moore opened her notebook and said something that made my chest loosen for the first time in a week. "Miss Parker, I want to be clear from the outset. You are not a target of this investigation. You're a witness, and we appreciate you coming forward." The relief was so intense I almost started crying. Agent Chen leaned forward. "Your complaint corroborates several red flags we'd already identified. Sterling Financial has been on our radar for about 8 months. We noticed revenue reporting inconsistencies during a routine audit of one of your clients. Then we found the shell companies. We've been building a case, but we didn't have an inside perspective until now." They'd been investigating for 8 months. That text message about auditors asking questions, Diane had known she was being looked at, and she'd been trying to cover her tracks while continuing to use me as her technical scapegoat. I walked them through everything: how I'd built the systems without understanding the full architecture, how my access had been deliberately limited, how I'd discovered the discrepancies only after seeing that text message. I showed them my employment contract, my communications with Diane, the evidence that I'd been compartmentalized and kept in the dark. Agent Moore was particularly interested in the yacht. That purchase triggered additional scrutiny, she said. It's difficult to justify that expenditure based on Sterling Financial's reported income. Your documentation of the unreported revenue flows gives us exactly what we need. They asked detailed questions about the shell companies, about who had administrative access to the transfer systems, about Diane's involvement in the technical setup. I answered everything honestly. By the end of the meeting, Agent Chen closed his folder and looked at me directly. Miss Parker, you did the right thing coming forward. We're going to need you to continue working as normal while we finalize our case. Can you do that? I glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragement. I could do it, because now I wasn't alone and I wasn't the target. They wanted Diane. The raid happened on a Thursday morning, exactly 16 days after my first meeting with the federal agents. I was at my desk, reviewing a client report, when the office door opened and 6 people in FBI windbreakers walked in, followed by Agents Moore and Chen. Diane Sterling? Agent Moore said, holding up a badge. We have warrants for your arrest and to search these premises. I watched all the color drain from Diane's face. She stood up behind her desk, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then her eyes found me, and I saw the exact moment she made the calculation, the decision to throw me under the bus. What is this about? She said, her voice shaking. I run a legitimate business. If there's been any financial irregularities, you need to talk to... She pointed directly at me. I trusted her with everything. She had access to all the accounts, all the systems. She's the forensic accountant. I can't believe she'd... Ma'am, Agent Chen interrupted, his voice firm. We need you to stop talking right now. We have evidence that you, Diane Marie Sterling, created a network of shell companies to embezzle funds from clients and commit tax fraud. Sarah Parker has been cooperating with our investigation as a witness. Diane's face went from white to red. She looked at me with pure hatred, and I stared back at her with something like calm. You, she hissed. You went to them? After everything I've done for you? I gave you a job. I mentored you. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, Agent Moore said. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. They were reading Diane her Miranda rights. At her desk, in the office I'd walked into every day for 3 years. Diane was still trying to talk, still trying to control the narrative. This is insane. Sarah built those systems. Ask anyone. She's the technical expert. I barely understood what she was doing. She must have... Ma'am, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, Agent Chen continued. They handcuffed her. Actually put handcuffs on Diane Sterling, the woman who'd patronized and manipulated and exploited me for 3 years, and walked her toward the door. She looked back at me one more time, and I met her eyes without flinching. This was really happening. The aftermath was surreal. I was interviewed 4 more times over the next month, always as a protected witness, always with Agent Moore reassuring me that my cooperation was invaluable to the case. Sterling Financial Consulting collapsed within a week of Diane's arrest. Clients pulled out immediately once the news broke, and federal regulators froze all assets pending investigation. I filed for unemployment and tried not to panic about my suddenly non-existent income, but the full scope of what Diane had done kept emerging, and it was staggering. Over 3 years, she'd embezzled $4.7 million from clients and the government. My legitimate systems, the ones I'd built in good faith to help clients manage their finances, had been the perfect cover. While I processed accurate client invoices and maintained proper records in the client-facing systems, Diane had been siphoning money off the top through her shell company network, using my credentials to make it look like part of the normal business flow. The shell companies had been set up years before I was even hired, which meant she'd been planning this and had brought me on specifically because she needed someone with serious technical skills to build systems sophisticated enough to handle increased volume while keeping me compartmentalized enough not to see the big picture. And Richard, the mysterious texter, Diane's husband. They'd kept their marriage quiet. She went by her maiden name professionally, and he stayed completely out of the business publicly. But he'd been in on everything, helping manage the shell companies, moving money around, even filing fraudulent tax returns. They'd been living off stolen money while I worked 70-hour weeks for $95,000 a year. The yacht, the Aspen house, the luxury vacations, all funded by systematically stealing from the clients who trusted us. Trusted me, really, since I'd done most of the actual work. The federal government seized everything: the yacht, the house, Diane's car collection, jewelry, investment accounts. Clients were being made whole through the asset recovery, though it would take time. Agent Moore told me I'd likely receive a significant whistleblower reward, though that could take years to process. Meanwhile, I was unemployed and trying to figure out how to rebuild my career after being the star witness in a massive fraud case. Diane's legal strategy became clear pretty quickly. She was going all in on blaming me. Her attorney filed motions claiming I'd been the mastermind, that Diane had been a trusting employer taken advantage of by a sophisticated forensic accountant who'd built an elaborate fraud scheme. They painted me as bitter about being overlooked for partnership, someone who'd embezzled millions while hiding behind the facade of being a loyal employee. They even submitted statements from yacht party guests confirming that yes, Diane had introduced me as the bookkeeper and that I'd seemed somewhat resentful. Perfect motive, her lawyer argued. The problem for Diane was my whistleblower complaint. I'd come forward before anyone had accused me of anything, with detailed documentation proving I'd discovered the fraud only days earlier. I had timestamps on my complaint showing I'd reported it within 72 hours of seeing that text message. I had screenshots proving I'd never had access to the shell company accounts. I had emails showing Diane had deliberately kept me siloed. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Aldrich, shut down Diane's defense strategy in a preliminary hearing I attended. Diane's lawyer tried the "she was so good at the technical work, she must have known what was happening" angle, which was darkly ironic, considering Diane had spent 3 years telling me I was just good at detail work. "Miss Parker has been cooperating with federal investigators for 2 months, Aldrich said flatly. She came forward voluntarily with evidence of the crime. She provided documentation proving she was deliberately compartmentalized and kept from seeing the full financial picture. Miss Sterling's own emails show she systematically limited Miss Parker's access while using her credentials without authorization. This isn't a case of two co-conspirators. This is a case of an employer exploiting a skilled employee's work while setting them up as a potential scapegoat." The judge agreed. Diane's attempt to shift blame collapsed completely. Agent Moore told me later that the prosecution had an airtight case. The shell companies were registered in Diane's and Richard's names. The embezzled money had funded their personal assets, and the timeline proved they'd been running this scheme before I was even hired. Diane was looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Richard was facing similar charges. Their entire life was unraveling, and there was nothing left to hide behind. 6 months later, Diane pleaded guilty to avoid trial. 12 years in federal prison, and Richard got 10. The prosecutor said they took the deal because the evidence was overwhelming. My whistleblower complaint, the financial records, everything. I received a substantial SEC whistleblower reward, over $800,000, which felt surreal until Agent Moore reminded me I'd saved the government millions in unreported tax revenue and helped recover stolen client funds. I used part of it to start my own forensic accounting consultancy, specializing in helping small to mid-sized companies prevent exactly the kind of fraud Diane had perpetrated. Turns out there's serious demand for someone who can spot these schemes and build systems that are actually transparent. Marcus proposed again in April. We'd technically been engaged before, but he wanted what he called a fresh start proposal, one that wasn't shadowed by Diane's manipulation. We're getting married next spring, and I'm actually happy now in a way I wasn't during those 3 years at Sterling. I think about that yacht party sometimes, about Diane introducing me as the bookkeeper while I stood there in a dress I'd worried was too fancy. I see now that the condescension wasn't accidental or thoughtless. It was strategic, keeping me minimized, kept me grateful for scraps, kept me from demanding access to information I should have had, kept me controllable. And if everything collapsed, it kept me blamable. Just the detail-oriented bookkeeper who must have been running schemes the boss didn't understand, except I understood everything now. I'm not anyone's scapegoat. I'm not staying silent when I'm being exploited. I'm not tolerating being minimized or having my work stolen or being positioned as someone's backup plan for when their crimes catch up with them. I built something real now, something that's actually mine, and I'll never let anyone take credit for my work again. But I still wonder sometimes, was going straight to the feds the right call, or should I have confronted Diane first and given her a chance to come clean? Let me know what you think.